Um, I'm Brian LaPass, Chief of Program Services at OPSC. Facilitating with me today is Joshua Potter, an Operations Manager in Program Services. We're going to be helping to get the meeting running smoothly, and then we're going to be helping out with questions and answers after each presentation. We have 3 topics today, and before I get into those, next week we have on March 20th we're bringing back the Facility Hardship and Seismic Mitigation Program regulation changes that we're proposing. We've had a bit of time between. That'll be our second meeting on that topic, but it's been quite a while. Our first meeting was many months ago. So, in anticipation of next week, if that's a topic that interests you, please take some time to read that item before the meeting. There's a lot in there, and it's something that we're excited to get out there and show you. So, if you're interested in that topic, that'll be coming out shortly. We'll be publishing that item very soon, and then having that meeting again 1 week from today on March 20th. Same time, 9 a.m. next Thursday. Today, our first presentation will be from Michael Watanabe. It's a continuation of the discussion we've been having on matching shares. These were part of Prop 2 changes, and so we're going to be continuing that. We also have proposed regulations to share with you today, so we're moving that one right along. The next topic after that will be Kelsey Muramoto. She's going to be talking about the new Career Technical Education Supplemental Grant. That's also part of Prop 2. This is the last subject we have to introduce things that are Prop 2 related, except for lead and water program. That one's going to be coming later in the spring. But this is the last topic that we have planned for Prop 2 implementation. We've had a meeting already on all the other topics, so we're moving right along. We're very happy with our progress. Looking forward to Kelsey being able to share career tech with you guys today. And then finally, we have 3 topics today. Finally, we're going to be joining Kevin Falk for a discussion on regulation changes. These regulation changes are not tied to Proposition 2. We're taking the opportunity we have right now with so many other changes happening to do some things that we've been kind of looking at for a while. We've had a parking lot list is what we call it, of not really urgent items, just things that could use some polishing and some sections that we wanted to clarify and update. So that's what Kevin's going to be talking about today in our third topic. Looking forward to the discussion today. Again, please enter any questions you have during the presentations into the chat, and then we'll be calling on people with raised hands after the conclusion of each presentation for each topic. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Brian. Let me share screen. All right. If you see in the chat, Joshua Potter put a link to today's item in there so you can follow along. I am on page 3 of the PDF. So this topic is talking about matching shares again. As Brian mentioned, this is our second time bringing this topic back to stakeholders for discussion. The first time we talked about this item was back on January 30th. The item on page 4 of the PDF, there are links to the previous meeting agenda, the whole entire item, all the things we talked about previously, as well as a link to the webcast of the meeting if you want to rewatch that one. So for today, as a reminder for matching shares, we're talking about the changes Prop 2 made to allow adjustments previously and still continuing. New construction was a 50-50 match program and modernization 60-40. Prop 2 added a point scale determination for sliding scales. We presented rough drafts of regs last month and proposed context changes to the 5004. So now we have that more written out how that actually looks like on those forms and in the regulations. I'll go through those. So this meeting, we'll go through that, and we'll also go through feedback that was heard during the last meeting and since that meeting during the public comment following the 2 weeks following that meeting. On page 5, we go through, and you'll see this comment as we continue the stakeholder meeting process. We'll go through all the items, comments that people have addressed, provided feedback on things that we need to address. We've included in a tabular format on each item, and we'll continue to do that as we have ongoing stakeholder meetings. We intend to include all stakeholder feedback in its full letter format as an attachment So that's on page 25 of the PDF if you wanted to read the entire letter of what people wrote. But what we've done in the items is summarize the ones that we believe we need to address or account for as part of our item. So the first question was actually brought up during the meeting on January 30th, and that was a question regarding lease-back method and whether certain criteria qualified as a project labor agreement. For determination of project labor agreements, we refer you back to your legal counsel and refer you to public contract code and to the definition of project labor agreements. And it's up to you guys to determine if your contracting method meets that or if you have that situation, so you can get those points for sliding scale adjustments. Public contract code section 2500 provides the authority for project labor agreements. It has probably 8 bullet points you need to look at for determining the requirements to meet that for public entities. And so you'll need to review that with your legal counsel. Question 2, to kind of summarize it, there initially appeared to be what the stakeholder thought was a conflict in statute on how it was written. The original statutes for SFP required OPSC to release funds after certification by the district that 50% matching or equal amount matching for new construction was provided by the district. Proposition 2 adjusted that statute in subsection B to clarify that there's adjustments to the matching share contributions. So we don't think there's any conflict in statute there for aligning the fund release requirements with the matching share requirements. On page 6, question 3. So in our original proposal for calculating matching shares and when you provide the information to lock in your matching share, we're recommending that happen at the time of processing the application. One commenter thought that, okay, well, we adjust new construction eligibility or refresh it at the time an application is processed. Likewise, if we're doing your bonding capacity at that time, if you're to make the parallel to modernization projects, when you determine modernization eligibility should be when the bonding capacity is determined. And we disagree with that comment. Modernization eligibility, it depends on when you adjusted it. We didn't think receive date is appropriate. We actually think it's more appropriate to do it at time of processing. So we didn't see a good nexus there between eligibility versus determining matching share. Processing still makes more sense, in our opinion, for when you should lock that in finally. And that's also consistent with what we do for financial hardship determination too. That the circumstances contained within a district, it makes sense for the board's direction regarding new construction eligibility at the time of processing, that we're checking everything one last time before it goes to board for approval. So that's our current recommendation that we're sticking with at the moment here, for absent any further discussion on that topic. Question number 4 on PDF page 7. We are talking about how the matching share is determined when pupil enrollment for the plus or over or under 200 pupils for getting your points for that topic. We were suggesting going by the same form for determining a small school district and determining enrollment in a district, what you report on the 5001. When we had drafted it last month, we had left out continuation high school pupils and special day class pupils. They're broken out in a different category on the 5001. So when we put them in our draft instructions, we didn't add those in. So we agreed those should be counted too. So what you'll see when I get to the form is we've added that to the instructions as well. So we're good with that one, and thank you for the feedback to correct that math. Question number 5, district's gross bonding capacity. There was a little bit of concern on whether, how the ability to get the bonding capacity from a county auditor controller would be. Since the beginning of the program for financial hardship, every financial hardships district has to provide us their bonding capacity information from the county auditor controller. We haven't seen an issue yet from any county. The commenter mentioned that sometimes they gotten the information from non-governmental entities, but as part of Proposition 2, there's also changes in master plan, and you have to submit this information on the bonding capacity to OPSC as part of the master plan requirement too. And it does specify it has to come from a local government agency. So it can't come from a non-governmental entity. But if stakeholders are aware of any other local government entity that can provide the information, we can provide some flexibility on what we might accept instead of a letter from the county auditor controller, but we're not aware of any at this time. You'll see in the draft regulations, we ask for the information on the amount, but we are not specific in the language in the regulations that it has to be from that entity. As long as it's from a local government entity, we can probably take a look at that one. So it gives us a little bit of flexibility, but just for explanation purposes, what you'll see in our letters when we ask for it, we're going to ask for that letter specifically. And then question number 6 was not so much a question, but just a request to provide some of the math behind the calculations and how that impacts the grants. There's no changes into the grants. So what the total project costs for any different project will remain the same, whether it's 50-50, 60-40, whether we shift percentages to 65-35, the total project cost remains the same. What statute does is require us to adjust the district contribution. And so the way we're accomplishing that, have it on page 8 at the bottom here. See a new line on our funding shells that we present to the board each month. And for this purpose, we're calling it local funding adjustment. For those of you familiar with the full day kindergarten program, when we had to create a full day kindergarten conversion grant to shift the percentages, it's similar in that manner. All the statutes and regulations, as they're built into another program, calculate the state share of the project, and then there's a match component by the district. What we are doing is still calculating the match component from the district, but then based on the points you receive on your project, we'll adjust that by shifting the district contribution over to the local funding adjustment amount. But the total match that's on that side of the equation remains the same. But instead of the district paying for that amount, that local funding adjustment will be paid for by the state. Similar to how we take the financial hardship contribution, offset the district contribution, and the state picks up that share also. Now, what we've done in page 9, it's shown the before and after, but we actually reversed it. The bottom is the before. Here's how it existed before with 60-40 on a mod project. We have the state share and the district contribution. For a project that becomes 65-35, we shifted 5% of that equation on the district contribution over to this local funding adjustment. So the total contribution by the district is less. And this local funding adjustment of $57,950 would be paid by the state. So effectively getting to the 65-35. So total project cost will not change, but that's how the math works. And so you should see this funding adjustment on item, as I said, on every funding shell, just so it's clear where the math came from, how much was contributed on the state versus local share. So it should be very transparent when you get those funding items. All right. We did, just for an example, based on points, how the percentages would shift the same math. And you'll just see the changes in local funding adjustment, depending on how many points you get. So if you get the full 10 or greater points, or greater than 10 points, you'll get the full 5%, and sliding scale downward. New construction will work exactly the same way. We didn't have an example of that one shown in the item, but exactly the same way. We go from 50-50 all the way to potentially 55-40. Okay. The next one, bottom of page 10 of the PDF, we talked about the project labor agreement and the timing of that. We recognize that at the time you submit your funding application, you may not know if you're going to have a project labor agreement in your project. You may not know it when we do the funding application and processing, but you believe you might be doing it. If you do a project labor agreement, we're going to ask you to certify on the form, basically, that if you certify that you're going to do a project labor agreement, we will give you the points, but you're acknowledging in the certification that at audit, we'll validate that you did at least have a project labor agreement somewhere in your project to keep those 2 points. If you didn't, you'll be required to we'll readjust your funding calculation of what it should have been. You'll be required to repay back any funding gained as a result of those extra points, as well as interest from the time of fund release all the way until it's repaid. So it can be an extensive period, but we want people to be conscious of making that certification that you want those 2 points because you intend to do the PLA. So we'll add a certification to the 5004 for that. Pages 11, 12, they kind of explain what changes we've made in the regulations as a whole and what we're proposing, just kind of for the record in written format. I'm just going to skip to page 13 and just show you because I think it's easier to see it that way. So page 13 of the PDF, we've added a new section. This was shown last month as well, new section 1859.70.5, and it shows how you calculate the points for a local match. This, for the most part, is an exact copy of statute. So we haven't changed any criteria, how the points are determined, the math, or anything behind that. On the form 5004, this is so small, sorry. You'll see a few changes throughout. There's going to be some numbering changes here at the bottom of page 15. It's because we inserted a new section 22. Calculate the matching share. So anything 22 or higher is going to be shifted one number down. So you'll see small changes there. Under, let me zoom in on this one. Here are the instructions for local matching share. These, for the most part, these will each A through D will line to the bullets on the form, actually filling in populating information. And then below it, we have the enrollment data that's calculated or added into your calculation of how many pupils in your enrollment. And you can see at the bottom there, we did add special day class pupils and continuation high school pupils in that math. And then on the form, zoom in on this one too. We had 5 questions. These 5 questions are the information we need to be able to calculate the number of points a project has for determining the matching share. If you are using OPSC online, you'll also see the same help text that's in the instructions, but it will specify when we need 2 decimal places or we need information rounded. So 5 questions there. And then lastly, the new certification. So this new certification is, again, if you don't know you're going to do a project labor agreement, but you believe you do, and you want to request the points for this project, we are asking as part of signing this form or submitting an OPSA line, you are certifying that you understand that at audit, we will check that, confirm you had a PLA in your project, and if not, any funding gained by those extra 2 points plus interest will be returned back to the state at that time. All right. And then that's all I had for this one. As I mentioned, beginning on page 5 is the public comments that we received since then. So you can read those in their entirety. So these will be presented to the board too, so the board can also see, what kind of comments we received on the creation of these regs. With that, I'll take any questions or comments on this particular item.
Not seeing anything in the chat and no raised hands thus far. We'll give it just a minute though.
As we're waiting for that kind of next steps, we will, just as before, we'll still give another 2 weeks for public comment for consideration. If we don't have any major comments on this item that we need to bring back, our intent for this particular one is bring it back to the next available board meeting to present these regulations to the board to keep matching shares moving. Matching shares does impact facility hardship seismic projects as well, that are being prioritized and processed now that may have come in after October 31st of 2024. So that this does apply to them. So we want to get this in regulation as soon as possible and effective. Speaking of which, we talked about bringing back this item for adjusting the matching shares for facility hardship and seismic as part of this item. And looking at how that would work, we found it more appropriate to include in the facility hardship seismic discussion item that Brian talked about next week. So we'll bring that one back in a different reg package.
Michael, there's no questions down here.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
All right, I'm not seeing anything else, so I think we can move on to career tech.
Yeah.
Bear with us just 1 second. We're going to be switching who's sharing their screen, so just bear with us for 1 sec, please. and we'll turn it over to Kelsey.
Okay, and can you guys see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. All right. Hi, as Brian mentioned, I'm Kelsey, and today we will discuss the Career Technical Education, CTE, Facilities Modernization Supplemental Grant. As a reminder, supplemental grants like this are provided in addition to the base grant for funding. So a little bit of background. Back in 2006, Proposition 1D established the Career Technical Education Facilities Program, also known as CTEFP, allowing qualifying school districts, county offices of education, and joint powers authorities to apply for funding to build new facilities, modernize existing facilities, or purchase CTE equipment. And now, with the passage of Proposition 2, Education Code 17078.74 was added, establishing a new supplemental grant for school facility program modernization projects for CTE facilities and equipment. This grant provides an increase of up to 5% of the modernization base grant authorized by Education Code 17074.10, which calculates funding based on the per pupil grant amount. Note, this calculation does not include supplemental grants like 50 years or older building. As further explained on pages 33 through 35, to request this grant, districts must have modernization eligibility and a valid modernization project with at least one CTE component. Examples of CTE components are listed at the top of page 34. These examples include, but are not limited to, modernization of facilities to support CTE programs, reconfiguring a structure to train students for high-demand technical careers, and purchasing equipment lasting an average of at least 10 years. Districts must also certify that the cost for the CTE portion exceeds the funding available for the qualifying modernization scope, and that the CTE components are necessary to maintain industry standards. And the district must be a local education agency operating a comprehensive high school, a career technical advisory committee, have a career technical advisory committee, and have an application that meets Education Code Section 17078.72I. The CTE program must also meet criteria under Education Code Section 17078.72B. In addition to meeting this requirement, the CTE program must meet the following listed at the top of page 35. And I'll give you a moment to briefly look over this. In order to accomplish this step, the district would need to obtain approval by the California Department of Education, CDE, with a score letter of at least 105 points. CDE is currently evaluating their process and intends to review these supplemental grants on a flow basis. And this would need to be submitted as part of an approved application for modernization funding. As shown in the section application submittal timing and reimbursement, for approved applications received on or after October 31st, 2024, OPSC proposes that during the application processing, districts may request the CTE supplemental grant if the project includes CTE components and would need to submit CDE approval to show the minimum score was met. For example, if the project includes equipment only, which does not require changes to the Division of the State Architect, DSA, plans, districts may request this grant without withdrawing the application. However, if the CTE eligible components requiring DSA approval is not included in the approved application, districts would need to withdraw and resubmit with updated plan approvals. As previously mentioned, this grant provides a modernization project with a grant adjustment increase not to exceed 5% of the state share of the per pupil modernization grant used for design, purchase, and installation related to CTE components. OPSC presents two options for determining the CTE supplemental grant. And as you can see at the bottom of this page, option 1 provides the lesser of 5% increase to the modernization base grant or the cost estimate for the CTE components of the entire project. Whereas option 2 provides up to a 5% increase to the modernization base grant based on a sliding scale methodology. As shown in step 1, OPSC would calculate the 5% of the total modernization project cost. Then, as shown in step 2, this amount is compared to the applicant provided cost estimate for the CTE components. Based on this, a percentage increase of 1% to 5% is applied. So I'll give you some time to look over this option. So regardless of the option that is selected, the CTE supplemental grant would be capped at 5% of the total modernization base grant. It is also important to note that if an applicant elects to submit more than one funding application using the same set of DSA-approved plans, only one of the applications will be eligible to receive the CTE supplemental grant. And with that, this concludes my presentation on our initial proposals for this new CTE Modernization Supplemental Grant. And we will now open this conversation for any feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, pretty straightforward grant there. While we're waiting for hands to be raised or others to enter questions in the chat, we did have one that we answered, but just in case you're unable to see the chat or haven't looked at it in a while, Bailey asks, could the CT supplemental grants also be for new construction projects? And Tracy Sharp answered, this supplemental grant is limited to modernization projects per the statute. That is correct. The statute does specify that it's a modernization program supplemental grant. Right. Any other questions on the CT supplemental
Brian,
grant?
there's no questions down here.
Oh,
Okay.
wait. Oh, wait a minute.
Oh,
There might be
okay. We're ready.
camera.
Go ahead.
Hi,
Morning.
Tamara Casper from Jack Schrader and Associates. So we are wondering if you are required to write the same grant application as the actual CTE grant. Seems like a lot of work for the 5%.
Yes, I believe we might have some of our CTE representatives here. If not, that is our understanding. I believe they were going to they're going to do some updates to their form just to indicate whether it was for the supplemental grant or if it's for an upcoming CTE full funding round. But I believe you would need to fill out the same application. I see Angel here.
Yep, thanks, Brian. So great question. We are currently working on the process. The way that the statute is currently written, the application process could be the same. We're looking at trying to, one second. Of course, you know, the one time. So we're looking at a process in order to make that a little bit easier. We have talked to OPSC. If you applied in the application round and scored on the lower end where the subscription of the larger grant would take place, I think, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, we talked about OPSC accepting that letter. So it would be a lot of work just for that 5%, but I think that's kind of where we're anticipating if you scored on the lower end of that round where it would be oversubscribed, that might be an option to still continue to use that score.
Yeah, I believe that's correct, Angel. Like Angel mentions, we're still working through that a little bit, but I think, you would need to include all those things in order for them to be able to score it properly. So I think that's maybe something that the district would have to weigh when they're considering whether to apply or not.
Okay, Brian, that does it down here.
Thanks, Lisa. All right, I'm not seeing anybody else. I'll just mention before we get on to our next topic, if you have questions that occur to you later, we do accept written comments or questions. You can email them to us for the next 2 weeks after this meeting. So if you think of anything else later, it's not too late. So, okay, seeing no other questions, I'm going to be moving on to our third topic, and I'm going to be introducing Kevin Falk. Let me just share my screen here, and then Kevin will be presenting. There we go. How does that look?
Looks good.
All right.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to tune in to our stakeholder meeting this morning. My name is Kevin Falk. I'm a program services supervisor, and I will be going over the proposed amendments for general updates to the school facility program, regulations, and forms. These updates are intended to add clarity, correct inaccuracies, and remove outdated requirements. It's been a while since the regulations and forms have had a general update, and with all of the changes being implemented with Proposition 2, we thought it would be a good opportunity to do a concurrent update for general regulation and form changes. I'll go over the proposed changes to regulation first before moving into the proposed updates to the forms. The first proposed update is to section 1859.2 definitions, specifically the definition of large charter school. Currently, small charter school is defined as a school with enrollment of 175 pupils or less. Medium charter school is defined as a school with 176 to 350 pupils. The current definition of large charter school is a school with enrollment greater than 351 pupils. With the definitions as they are now, a charter school with exactly 351 pupils would not be considered a small, medium, or large charter school and would be undefined. To maintain consistency with the other definitions, we propose that the definition of large charter school be revised to be a school with 351 pupils or more. The next update is the section 1859.22, application for funding on leased. The school facility program allows for applications for funding for facilities that are or will be located on land leased to the district, provided certain conditions are met. The land must be leased from a governmental agency, and depending on other circumstances, the term of the land lease at the time the approved is accepted by OPSC must be either 25, 30, or 40 years. Since the lease term is examined upon receipt of the funding application, the district must either submit the application on the same day the lease is executed, if the term is for the minimum required time, or enter into a lease for a term longer than the minimum years required in regulation. A clarifying update is proposed to make it clear that the term of the lease remaining for the land at the time the approved application is accepted must be either 25, 30, or 40 years. Moving on, the next proposed update is the sections 1859.60, calculation to determine modernization baseline eligibility, and 1859.78.6, modernization grant for 50-year or older permanent buildings. This update is in regards to determining the age of facilities, clarified that the 20, 25, and 50-year period shall begin 12 months after the plans for the construction or placement of the building on the school site were approved by the DSA. This clarifies that the stockpile approval date will not be used to determine the age of a facility. Stockpiled facilities are not actively used for school purposes and do not age or deteriorate at the same rate as facilities actively used for school purposes. Therefore, they do not require modernization at the same time periods as facilities actively used for school purposes to extend the useful life of the facility. An additional clarifying amendment is proposed for section 1859.78.6 to specify that for facilities previously modernized with state funds, the 50-year period shall begin on the date of its previous apportionment. This maintains consistency with sections 1859.78.6b1b and 59.78.6b2b, which specify that the total permanent classrooms or square footage not previously modernized with state funds shall be calculated for the purposes of determining available 50-year or older pupil grants. The next proposed amendment is to section 1859.71.2, new construction additional grant for fire code requirements. The Green Oaks Fire Protection Act, the Education Code sections 17074.50 through 17074.56 require, among other things, the inclusion of an automatic fire sprinkler system for all new construction projects submitted to DSA on or after July 1, 2002. To maintain consistency, this amendment clarifies that all new construction applications for which the DSA approved plans and specifications include fire sprinkler work qualify for the automatic fire additional grant. The next set of proposed amendments is to sections 1859.77.2 and 1859.77.3, use of new construction grant funds. These sections cover the use of grants request for new construction projects, which, in part, allow school districts to request new construction grants to construct classrooms at a grade level different from the grants requested, provided certain requirements are met. Currently, the way the use of grants regulations are written do not contemplate the requirement in section 1859.51 to process applications under new construction eligibility derived from the prior or current fiscal year's enrollment data, nor do they consider that applications are currently processed in arrears. Currently, applications are submitted approximately 2 years prior to processing. Therefore, districts may not be able to accurately determine if there will be sufficient new construction ability to support their application at the time of processing, and may need to change to a use of grants request to use grants from a grade level different than the classrooms in the project to support the funding application. OPSC proposes 2 amendments to the requirements for utilizing a use of grants request to allow for greater flexibility for applicant school districts. A current requirement is that a school board resolution discussed at a public hearing at a regularly scheduled meeting of the district's governing board be adopted on a date that precedes the application receive date. Applications that initially request the use of grants will still be required to provide the resolution with the initial submittal. However, applications which switch to a use of grants request during processing will now have the flexibility of providing a resolution that was adopted by the governing board after the date of the initial application receipt. The second amendment is to the requirement which currently requires that school districts intend to amend an application to include a use of grants request after its submittal, withdraw and resubmit the application and receive a new date in line. OPSC proposed to remove this requirement and allow for the amendment of an application to include a use of grants request without having to withdraw and resubmit and be able to maintain its original date in line. The next proposed amendment is to section 1859.81.1, separate apportionment for site acquisition and design costs. Financial hardship school districts may request a separate apportionment of the design and/or the site acquisition for a project before requesting full construction funding. The advance amount apportioned is an estimate of the funds needed for design, engineering, and other pre-construction costs, providing a mechanism for financial hardship districts unable to locally fund the cost for design to begin the design phase of their projects. This advance apportionment amount provided is a percentage of the pupil grant amount requested in the application for funding for a separate design apportionment. Once design is complete and districts are ready to submit their application for funding for the full construction apportionment, they are required to request a minimum percentage of the grant requested in the application for the separate design apportionment. As currently worded, regulation could be misinterpreted to mean that a minimum percentage of the dollar value previously requested must be requested at the full funding apportionment. This amendment clarifies that the minimum percentage is of the pupil grant requested in the application for funding for the separate design apportionment. The next proposed amendment is to section 1859.83b and small size projects. Currently, applications which house 200 pupils or fewer qualify for the excessive cost hardship grant for small size projects. For projects that house fewer than 101 pupils or up to 4 fully loaded K-6 classrooms, the grant provides 12% of the base pupil grant amount. Projects that house between 101 and 200 pupils, or between 5 and 8 fully loaded K-6 classrooms, may receive 4% of the base grant. This amendment aligns the grant eligibility requirements with the school facility program loading standards of 7 through 8 and 9 through 12th grade classrooms, which are 27 pupils each. Therefore, the proposition is that for 7 through 12th grade projects, the 12% grant amount for small size would be provided for applications housing fewer than 108 pupils, and the 4% amount would be provided for applications housing between 109 and 216 pupils. For projects that span grade levels, like a K-8 or a K-12 school, the loading capacity of the highest grade level served will be used to determine the grant threshold. The last proposed regulatory amendment is to section 1859.90.2, priority funding process, to correct a typo for section 1859.90.2A2 to accurately reference subsection A6 instead of subsection A5. Section 1859.90.2A2 reads as follows: acknowledge that a valid original signature Form SAB 5005 must be submitted and physically received by the OPSC within 90 calendar days of apportionment or approved advance release of funds request, except for a career technical education facilities project in A5. A5 refers to a district or charter school acknowledging that by participating in the priority funding process, it is waiving its rights to a timeline for fund release submittal. A6 concerns career technical education facilities projects. Therefore, we are correcting this incorrect reference. Now I'll cover the proposed amendments to school facility program forms, starting with the application for funding Form SAB 5004, for which we are proposing a few changes. We propose to update the specific instructions for sections 17 and 19 to specify that construction contracts executed on or after August 22nd, 2022, that include modular construction via piggyback contracting are not eligible for funding and will be returned to the applicant unprocessed, consistent with the board's action taken at the February 2006 meeting and reaffirmed at the June 22nd, 2022 SAB meeting. We propose to update section 19, construction delivery method, to revise developer built to developer build, to use more widely recognized and accepted terminology. A few certifications are proposed to be added to section 24, starting with one in regard to Education Code section 17584, implemented as part of Assembly Bill 1867, which requires that a school district, county office of education, or charter school that intends to seek state funding pursuant to the Green Act for modernization projects submitted to the DSA to use faucet aerators and water conserving plumbing in all bathrooms. The next certification is in regards to hybrid applications, which are multiple funding applications submitted for the same set of DSA-approved plans and specifications. As a condition of processing these hybrid applications, OPSC requires various documents to ensure that double funding does not occur. These documents include a clear delineation of scope, a proration of project costs, an explanation of proration methodology, a certification that funds for one hybrid application will be used exclusively for that application, and an acknowledgement that expenditures should be tracked and reported separately according to the cost proration. OPSC also requires that the scope delineation and proration of project costs define the scope of work attributable to each hybrid application in the plan set when the first hybrid application was received and processed. This is in alignment with Education Code section 17070.63, which states that the total funding provided for a project in the school facility program constitutes the full and final contribution to the project. The proposed amendment to the form adds a certification with language directly from that Education Code section. The certification will also be added to the application for career technical education facilities funding Form SAB 5010. The last proposed change is to the Fund Release Authorization Form SAB 5005 to remove the requirement that accepted bid documents, including additive and deductive alternatives, be attached for new construction projects that complete Part 5 of the form. As only pages from the construction contract are necessary to substantiate the certifications made in Part 5 of the Form SAB 5005, the bid documents are not required and represent unnecessary effort on behalf of the applicant. To streamline the fund release process, this requirement has been removed. That concludes the proposed amendments we have for your consideration today. For more information, please feel free to review the cover item for these changes in the agenda attached to today's meeting. The proposed changes are fully detailed in the attachments to this item. Thank you all for your time and attention. With this, I'll turn it back over to Brian, who will open the floor to any questions and/or comments you may have.
Thanks, Kevin. Hey, just one thing really quick. I think we have a change to the 5002 we didn't mention. You mind talking about that briefly?
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. We also propose a change to the existing school building capacity, Form SAB 5002. The proposed amendment updates specific instructions for the substantial enrollment requirement. It's an adjustment in Part 3. This amendment clarifies that the non-severe and severe classroom capacity that results from this adjustment cannot be allocated across all grade levels. They must instead be reported under the respective column. So the resulting adjustment to non-severe capacity as a result of this calculation must be reported in the non-severe column, likewise with severe special day class. The reason for this is that SDC facilities have stricter design requirements and are not as interchangeable with K-12 classrooms as K-12 classrooms are with each other. So that's why we're proposing this adjustment. And our revision adds clarity to the instructions to streamline the application process.
Thank you. Thank you. One other thing I'll mention too is it's the irony is not lost on me that we have a typo in our typo fix section here. It should be 90.2A6 right here. So thought that was pretty funny, something that I noticed. Not seeing any questions thus far. Does anybody have anything to add to any of these or any questions that we can answer?
Brian, there's no questions down here.
Thank you. These are changes that we've been monitoring for quite some time, and it's nice to be able to get them out there and add some clarity. So appreciate everybody taking a look at these, and should make our regs a little bit better. Okay, everybody's feeling a little introverted today. That's okay. There's been a lot of topics happening. Like I said, we do have a 2-week period where we'll accept written feedback on any of these items. We welcome that. Like Michael mentioned, we look at everything, and we always like to make sure and address all those questions. So if there's anything that you're wondering about or you want us to consider, please send it in to us, and we'll make sure and get it into our follow-up item on any of these topics. If I'm not,
I was just going to say real quick, Brian, while we wait, just to double check, make sure there's no, last second questions you can think of. As Brian mentioned, we do accept them for 2 weeks. Please feel free to email those in, give us a call, whatever. Would like to mention, as far as the global regulation cleanup, as we're kind of calling it, there will be additional items coming forward in the near future in order to ensure that we kind of sparse some of these things out, allow for discussion and time to create them in the background. We'll have a few different segments on that topic. Again, these are global program cleanup opportunities, so not necessarily directly implied as a result of Prop 2 passage, but an opportunity to make things a little bit more clear and definitive through the process of the school facility program.
thank you. Yeah, we're always looking for ways to make improvements. Okay, just another reminder that we'll see you a week from today for facility hardship and seismic mitigation. Looks like somebody's getting up with a question.
Yep.
Camera?
Hi, so this is a follow-up question from the last meeting in regards to the second round of modernization funding. So I was wondering if wanted to point out that if the building was modernized in 2000, but they didn't receive that apportionment until 2005, it would seem that the DSA start date would be off of the DSA approval of when they did the project in 2000 versus when they received the apportionment. Has that been considered?
I can go ahead and take the response to that. We are looking at that. That has been brought up. We are going to be somewhat limited in that capacity, specifically in that the statutory language points directly to the apportionment date.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Great question. Thank you.
Is that it? No other questions? All right, Brian, we're good down here.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like we're going to be adjourning fairly early today. Looking forward to seeing everybody next week. Our next meeting after that, I believe, is scheduled for April 3rd. That'll be a much more robust discussion that day. There'll be several topics that day. And we'll be sending out information on that in the near future. As always, thank you all so much for spending your time with us this morning. Any of the feedback that we receive, we're very grateful for it. And like I've said before, it helps us to make the best rules possible. So thank you all for your participation, and we'll see you soon.